Right, now this morning's session is a discussion on the impact of ICTs on teacher education and future directions. It really is a discussion that covers the entire region, and to really give an exposition of the potential of the ICTs to support access to ongoing quality teacher professional development. Each of our panelists represents an agency or an institution playing a significant role in implementing and guiding ICT in education projects or programs. I'm going to briefly tell you what the objectives for this discussion is. It's a webinar tool. It's really to increase awareness of the level of impact of ICTs ICTs are having in the institutions that provide in-service and ongoing teacher education internationally, in Jamaica, and in the rest of the region. Another objective is to increase the knowledge and exposure of practitioners, policymakers, and users to best practices in the use of ICTs for in-service and ongoing teacher professional development, and of course, future directions for these. We're expecting that among you are policymakers, teacher educators, and so on. So we hope to have a very interesting session. Let me just share with you the order of the presentations. First, we'll hear from Dr. Marcia Stewart. Then we'll hear from Dr. Ashburn Pinnock, Dr. Hope Main, Vladimir Pierre, who will be joining us via Skype, and final presentation we'll hear from Mrs. Maxine Henry Wilson, JTEC's Commissioner. So let me start by briefly introducing Mrs. Stewart. Dr. Stewart really needs no introduction, I think, in this audience. As you know, her experience spans several levels of Caribbean education system with major emphasis on teacher education, program evaluation, and higher education quality assurance. Dr. Stewart's work across the Caribbean has included leadership in the development and associate degree in teacher education in Belize, guidance to the Turks and Caicos Island and the Cayman Islands in developing their first indigenous teacher education program. And as you know, she's the current head, I believe, of the Joint Board for Teacher Education. No further delay, Dr. Stewart.
Just frozen on me as I have. Okay. It's live, okay. Good morning, everybody. As you hear, to speak from the perspective of the impact of ICT on teacher education in Jamaica and the region. My focus will primarily be on the smaller institutions offering teacher education in Jamaica, but with some reference to other institutions and anecdotal, just the odd anecdotal reference to things in the wider Caribbean region. And I look at it broadly from the context that ICT impacts not the system generally, usually in 4 ways. Social, recognize the role that technology plays in society as a whole in how members relate to each other. And therefore, in the teacher education or higher education system, there's no different there. It does impact social relationships. Vocational, in that we tend to think that it's just a job-related competencies, but more so the general skills in technology, because most employers want people coming in, regardless of the area of specialization, with some basic skills in ICT. They expect reasonable competence on a general level in ICT. Then it is also a catalyst for change. It restructures organizations, it increases democratic participation, and so forth, and improves transparency. So it changes how organizations operate. And of course, in terms of educational institution, it enhances learning and brings greater efficiency to the system. UNESCO, in its recommendations as to the conditions that will affect change, has identified 10 factors that will influence positively or negatively. And all of these have implications for what happens in our teacher education system. In the first instance, there must be a dissatisfaction with the way things are happening, how we do things now. You need assistance to get the teacher educators to acquire skills. You need infrastructure. You need time for them to acquire skills. You need incentives to make them want to acquire skills. You need to ensure participation of youth. And of course, you need commitment and leadership in the whole process. When we look at that, then we think of the Jamaican situation. And I was rather pleased last night when the minister in his presentation talked about ramping up the teacher education sector, because reality is that within the sector, perhaps the smaller institutions are a little behind. In looking at it, I want to look at it. I'm going to use a way of classifying higher education to classify youth. In looking at take-up of higher education, we talk about the elite, mass and universal. Normally, elite, 15% or less, mass, up to 30%, universal, those who have you have higher education at 50% or more. So I want to think of the usage in our system as either elite, mass, or universal, not applying those percentages to it, but just as a sort of qualitative way of assessing it. And perhaps within our teachers' colleges in Jamaica, we are somewhere, I'm not sure that we certainly are not at universal. We perhaps are, there I go again. We perhaps are at somewhere between elite and mass, and it may be at an institutional level rather than a system level. If we were to look at it at a system level, perhaps we are at low mass or high elite, as you think about it. And I want to come to the fact that perhaps because of where we are is the size of the sector. And projects always seem to take in teacher education as an afterthought rather than seeing it as the engine of what happens. And I won't go into all the examples that I can quote, but but I know most of the projects, I think of when eLearning, and I'm looking at time, but when eLearning started, the teacher education system came in after the fact. So what are some of the things that has been happening and recognizing in the sector? We look at access. And to what extent has ICT, because access we know is a critical factor for higher education. So how has ICT impacted access? And I use the School of Education, UWI, as an example. UWI was the precursor of online learning within the University of the West Indies. From the mid-1990s, they started offering MEd online to the region, long before the university as a whole undertook the whole issue of online learning. Now it is par for the course, but really the pioneers in that was the School of Education. It continues to use it also in things like the virtual learning space, which allows simultaneous offering across countries at the same time using one lecturer. It was issues like that which led the joint board to partner with the Commonwealth of Learning in order to foster the facility in the higher education system, in particular the teacher education system. It really started with eLearning, where eLearning facilitated a number of teacher educators to get a master's in the technology, in Technology with the University of British Columbia. So the joint board built on that through a critical partner, the Commonwealth of Learning, who we use those same persons with base information to widen their ability to do online teaching, to use OERs and so forth. The sort of approach that was being used was in implementing innovations, you need champions, especially in a context where you cannot address a universal usage. So you need champions who will push the innovation. And that was the idea behind this cluster of persons where every college had one or two persons who were able to utilize the technology at an advanced level and therefore to push the use within its college. I hope my moderator is keeping my time because I'm not doing so. But in that regard then, what has happened is that at the moment, I can't say that the teachers' colleges have universally, as I said, adapted it. It is, to a large extent, dependent on the thrust of individuals and the thrust of different groups. So boards of studies across colleges, in some instances, use it in order to keep their conversation going virtually. A number of lecturers use the Moodle and other online facilities to facilitate learning. To the extent that, for example, anecdotally again, the joint board is, we're partnering with some work in Antigua with the teacher education department of the State College. I needed to have the release of one of the lecturers, one of the ICT experts in the colleges as part of the team. And I was able to get that release only because she does all her classes. Even though technically it's a face-to-face environment, she has all her classes online. And consequently, her principal was satisfied that her students would not have suffered by the week that I was taking her away to be in Antigua. So, and you see that happening across the colleges in pockets. Unfortunately, at this stage, I can't say it is happening to the extent that we want to. But I want to bring the fact that it is like that because of the lack of the infrastructure within the colleges. Again, happy to hear the minister speaking to it. And I'm sure Dr. Pinnock is going to pick up on that when he comes in. But the reality is that you can implement when you have the facilities. But the colleges are way behind in terms of the facilities that you would want to see in a tertiary education system. When they're embedded in larger entities, such as a school of in the University of the West Indies, or at UTech, where it is embedded in a broader environment of higher education, the chances of its having the high-level use and high-intensity use will be more likely and more probable than in small institutions where it is not, they don't have the leverage to get the sort of investment to improve their infrastructure to enable universal use across the colleges. So that's one of the things that I think going forward we will have to try and see. How do we develop a plan which takes it beyond just a college to a system? And I know that teacher education tends to be regarded as unattractive as a system because it reaches to such a small percentage of the population. You look at the number of teachers that out of the the 8 teachers' colleges that constitute the teachers' colleges of Jamaica, we had 700 graduating this year. So it's a small number vis-a-vis the rest of the population. So it tends to be forgotten. But the important thing is that it is a critical engine of what happens across the system. So it's important that we be able to implement it system-wide. What we find is that individuals have to use their own resources to a large extent. And if I take my example beyond Jamaica to the Antigua, for example, in Antigua, we find that there is an informal, and I say informal level of bring your own devices, use your own devices, again, because of the lack of resources. So individual teachers, individual lecturers utilize what he or she has along with what their students have in order to be able to utilize the technology within the system. So we need to look at it systematically. Final note, because I know my time is up, is that we have to look at, we tend to think of ICT as impacting pedagogy within the education sector. But we must remember that it is also a critical factor for management. Again, the colleges are moving towards using that, introducing their student information system, moving from what was traditionally a paper trail to a system of online record keeping. They are also looking at how they can use it to manage systems like examination setting. So they are looking at an electronic or software to help in their item bank development, which will make their examination setting, the whole process of setting examination, far more critical. So it's important that we look, as I said in closing, at the system, how we feed into the system, how we recognize the system as an engine of what goes in so that it will cut down, it ensures sustainability, because some of the things that the ministry has to do, ministries have to do within the field would already be a front-end type of activity. So my thrust is rethink how we place teacher education in program planning for ICT in the education system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. She's really gave a very comprehensive presentation. She was asked to do a qualitative assessment of the overall impact of ICTs on teacher education in the region. She pointed to the issues, the neglect, and the fact that in terms of teacher education, it's often a forgotten area when we are planning projects. Yet everything boils down to having quality teachers in our classroom. Now, unless you have a very burning questions, I'm going to ask that you hold your question until after all persons have presented. Okay? Now, our next presenter is Dr. Ashburn Pinnock. Dr. Pinnock is currently the president of Vimaiko University College, former principal of Sam Sharp Teachers College, and he has been asked to identify, in summary, the challenges faced in leveraging the new technologies in Jamaica's tertiary education institutions. Please help me to welcome Dr. Pinnock.
Good morning. I think Dr. Stewart had really did half of my presentation regarding the challenges. It is very visible and therefore easy to examine. However, I would like to identify these challenges under, do I have a pointer? Under two main headings. It says, identify, in summary, the challenges faced in leveraging new technologies in Jamaica's teacher education system. I know new, because we haven't really received the old ones yet. And therefore, I don't know how we'll get onto the new ones. However, I took the liberty of naming a few of the new ones, as I read, coming out of Britain and the more developed nations. And these are some of the things that we should be looking at as modern facilities and modern way of training our teachers. It is interesting to note that every issue in education, 6C results, etc., is blamed on the teacher, and yet the teacher tends to be the one that gets the least attention as far as I'm concerned. And by the way, the views that you hear from me is not necessarily those of the organization I represent. I take full responsibility for those views. Where do I click? Okay. Oh, so, all right. So I place them under two broad headings, and one is the poor attitude of key stakeholders towards ICT, and the second is the low value placed on teacher education. And when I say poor attitude of key stakeholders, I'm not leaving us out of it. I'm not leaving the colleges or the lecturers or the principals, the administrators out. I say all stakeholders. And then the low value placed on teacher education. Teachers' colleges in particular in the system are treated like the Cinderella of a tertiary system. And as Dr. Stewart alluded to the fact that most of these programs that are infused out of USAID and all the major projects that we spend hundreds of millions on in Jamaica, the colleges always come at the back end because it's almost as if it's an off-the-fall. Now I was saying to someone this morning, as I see my students that I taught in 1991, that is 25 years ago, when I started teaching at Samsha, many of those students are now principals. There's one year I think I say with a doctor before a year, I'm so proud. And the point I'm making is that if we were infusing technology and all those innovations with these students across the island, they would so be infused and infused that they would have been driving the system today. But we keep pouring on in the schools, and nothing is wrong with that. But what we're doing is that we keep pouring the new wine into old bottle and not arranging the system so that the ones who are retiring are the ones who benefit, and the ones who are being trained coming in are not being benefit from a situation. Then there's a low infrastructure to accommodate ICT, and that has to do with connectivity, availability of device, and access to software, licensing, etc. So even if someone wants to donate or you want to do this stuff, it's difficult for you to access it, to receive it, because of the infrastructural deficiency. And of course, under the heading of attitude, you have the government and the lack of political will. When you listen to what is happening in Jamaica and all the millions of dollars, US and otherwise, that have been spent on things that are washed away. I hear at one point of a particular piece of road that costs nearly $1 billion Jamaican dollars, I think. And when I saw the value, I said to myself, I remember these are my views, I said to myself, and enter the classroom, how many students the low interest shown in the colleges, the low level of investment in ICT training and infrastructure, and of course, the college's infrastructure. You know, I went to my alma mater in Mandeville some years ago. As I walked into the lab, I was so embarrassed because I was coming from a teacher's college. And here this principal greeting me to say this is the big shot principal from X college. And yet his labs are much more equipped than my lab. The teachers' colleges in particular are oh sorry, I'm going the opposite direction. And of course, the same attitude with corporate Jamaica. You go to certain graduation and you hear about the $1 Million Club and you hear about billions of dollars being given to this and this. But teaching is not really very boasty anymore. I remember Saw Howard talking to me sometime about the My Command and what happened and the kind of elevation they received when they graduated is not so anymore. We are now an endangered species. And therefore, we find that the corporate world do not really support teacher education in the same way that they support others. And of course, the low investment that is given. And of course, it is the other factor is indifferent attitude of many institutions towards integration of technology as a tool. So we have to take some blame for ourselves. And we do not see technology as a tool. And in fact, we are not really big thinkers. So you walk into the school and you don't want to change the world. You want to beg a little thing here from a fair or a little fundraising. And so one of the things that why corporate Jamaica is not really paying us that much attention, because we don't put on our jacket and tie and walk into their boardroom like confident persons and say, listen, and demand some kind of respect and all of that. So we are part to be blamed in the way we are thinking in that sector. And of course, we see where students are we not being very creative and thinking out of the box? And the colleges themselves have invested very low in terms of technology. And the poor attitude of lecturers and other college personnel towards technology. And that is because of the fear or the low self-efficacy that they do possess. You see, despite the moderate or high level of personal use, now Jamaicans are very good with technology. That's the irony. And everybody walk with a high-tech cell phone, and everybody walk with a pad and iPad and all these fancy gadgets. But will they use it in the classroom? I know that my kids have very good smartphones because I have no choice but to buy them. But yet they are training with a huge knapsack on their backs, going to school every day with 100 pounds of outdated books. And yet the cell phone has more information than all those knapsacks in that school combined. And yet I have to pay $30 every day for them to give someone that phone to lock up and collect it after school. Travesty. And so you find that despite the high level of use, it's not being used for what it's supposed to be. And of course, I'll get in there. Right. And the students themselves, highly technical, digital citizens, and what they call in America again? The one that Hillary not appealing to? Millennial. And all these persons, but the level of infusion in their own work. My kids will come and ask me a question and have the phone in their hand. I said, don't ask me, go on Google and find it. And so despite the high level of personal use of technology, students are naturally they're not properly to use the technology for their own educational pursuits. And they are discouraged, of course, as I mentioned before. And of course, we also have to blame the system overall. And the system overall is that we do have an education system with modern aspiration. If you ask everybody, they want to be like China, Singapore, and you hear people talk about that all the time. But the system is built on an old foundation of archaic, exam-driven culture. And so out of that, it's very difficult because you see, technology and critical thinking and all these things are time-consuming. And you may not finish the syllabus. You may not finish learning all the things that you need to know. But no one is focusing on the outcomes and the skills. You're just focusing on completing that content. And of course, teacher education has not escaped this. And of course, there's no clear policy for IT teacher education, no clear structure in place to infuse ICT in teacher ed, no coherent ICT standards requirement. 20 years ago when I was studying, we had to learn about the standards in the USA, the ICT standard, and no teacher can graduate and enter the classroom without knowing these standards. And of course, the low level of training for teachers to use technology as a tool. But in fact, we tend to see it more as a subject. The limited availability of reliability and indigenous data necessary. So as we've done a real comprehensive study to see what is needed and what works. And of course, these are from as early as 2002, Mainga and Powers speak of the many factors that impact teacher educators as we implement meaningful use of technology. And these includes, and they concur what I was saying, lack of funding, lack of professional development for our teachers and our people, lack of administrative support, lack of technology support plans, and more emphasis is placed on computer literacy rather than the infusion of technology. I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Dr. Pinnock did not disappoint. He did not hold back his punches and really spoke to the challenges. I think he covered everybody. Government, teachers, principals, schools, planners, policymakers. So you were not disappointed. Hold your questions. Our next speaker is Dr. Hope Ming. She's the program leader, Career and Technical Education Program Graduate Studies Unit in the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies at the University of Technology. Dr. Main's body of work lies in teacher education and curriculum and instruction. Her research interests spans specific areas such as teacher training experience of teacher educators in the post-colonial context, the use of STEM methodology in teacher preparation, social recognition and teacher preparation. She's passionate about teacher preparation and has a vested interest in preparing beginning teachers to understand what it means to teach, their philosophy of teaching, and the importance of understanding methodology. She's driven by the motto, the race is not for the swift, but for those who can endure it. She will provide an overview of the STEM methodology and ICTs, the new paradigm for teacher preparation. Let me to welcome her.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My task is to look at the STEM methodology and ICT integration, the new paradigm for teacher preparation. I'll focus the discussion on the paradigm shift of teacher education, understanding the new paradigm STEM and ICT integration, implementing STEM and ICT integration at the classroom level, and my own personal question. ICT look like in post-colonial Jamaica. When I look at teacher education and paradigm shift, it's critical to understanding the paradigm shift in teacher education is examining the epistemological and ontological underpinnings or perspectives of it. Essentially, what is the value, what is the purpose of knowledge? What is worth knowing? What constitutes our knowing? So the big question is, knowledge for whom and knowledge for what? Looking at teacher traditions over the years in the 20th century, we started out as having 4 distinct traditions in teacher education. One of them, the academic tradition. In this tradition, the focus was on preparing teachers to becoming scholars and subject matter specialists. Then we moved on to a model called the social efficiency model. In this model, we were preparing teachers around a technical analysis. Essentially, the competency-based model of teacher education was focused on in the 1960s and 1970s. Then we moved towards a developmentalist model or tradition of teacher education, where the focus then became child-centered. Then we moved from that to a more social reconstructionist model, focusing on solving the world's problem in the society. So these persons, Liston and Zeigner, they actually put together 4 basic traditions to show the movement of teacher tradition throughout the years. So what does this paradigm shift now looks like in this century? The movement of teacher preparation is now from a behaviorism approach to a more humanistic approach. So conditioning learning versus constructing knowledge together. The movement is from a prescriptive type of learning or teaching to a more descriptive teacher education model. Then the movement is also from teacher-centered to student-centered. The movement is also from paper-pencil tests to alternative testing. The movement is from textbooks to integrating ICT in the classroom. The movement is also from teacher-centered strategies to active learning strategies. And finally, the movement is from scientific, linear, structured to flexible and more exploratory classrooms. So let's now try to understand the new paradigm STEM and ICT integration. What is it? It is really an approach to teaching which integrates science, technology, the e-design process, which is an inquiry-based model, and mathematics in the teaching and learning environment. The approach is supported by ICT, as it acts as a driver to engage students in researching, exploring adequate content on their own. Through the use of ICT, the packaging, retrieval, manipulation, transmission of content is reflective of this digital age. Therefore, the STEM classroom is deliberate and explicit attempt to integrate STEM principles and ICT through the use of what is called the 5E lesson planning or the design process. STEM classrooms utilize project-based learning, discovery learning, problem solving, essentially constructing knowledge with teacher and student. It connects real-life problems, it draws on prior learning, engages students in robust problems, and overall it's an innovative classroom where new ideas emerge. And we all know about this type of classroom because it's what is being advocated now with the National Standards Curriculum. Understanding the new paradigm also involves lots of resources. Critical thinking skills are being tapped into, communication, creativity, and collaboration. Multiple perspectives are encouraged in our classroom. The teacher facilitates. It is inclusive rather than exclusive. It is descriptive, where it allows for flexibility. Students are not voiceless, and lots of reflection is taking place. So then, let's look at it in the post-colonial context, this paradigm. What's the impact? Now, when we look at our post-colonial context, we have been colonized to thinking that we are a problem to be solved. So Cicero, he says, the colonizing man reduced the indigenous man to thingification. Back in the days, it was banking education, as Paul Freire actually put it. We go into the classroom, we disseminate information, students get it, and that's it, that's all we do. So there is a power coming from the teacher, and the students are passive learners. That's from colonization days in our post-colonial context. Said speaks about othering. People are unaware of who they are and were looked at as a problem to be solved. In our classrooms, our students were looked at a problem to be solved. And so the teachers were the center of the learning. They were the ones giving the knowledge, and the students weren't doing anything. So students were voiceless and passive. Homni Baba, he says that hybrid society. We are taking on from our colonial masters. Hence, the types of behaviors that we see now in our education system of the teacher being in control of the classroom and the students just wanting to take knowledge from us, it is still there. It's a hybrid society. So the context impacts how this new paradigm is going to be perceived and implemented. So, question is, what factors would affect the implementation of this new approach in the classroom? It is definitely our context when we look at where we are coming from. So even though we want to move on, we have to consider where we are coming from in order to move on to this new paradigm. Now I focus my attention to the implementation of STEM and ICT. A curriculum becomes a reality when the teacher implements it. So what factors would affect implementation? Leadership support is very important. If we don't have leadership support, then this is not going to be a reality in our schools. So it must also be inclusive where teachers, students, administrators, everybody needs to come together. A curriculum implementation team needs to be put together in order for this ICT and STEM integration to take place. Clarification of goals. Teachers, everybody need to understand what are the goals of this new paradigm shift in our country. They need to understand the relevance of the change. Why the change? It is critical not only for you to implement it, but also understand the relevance of this change. Also the complexity of it, an understanding of the curriculum materials. You don't need to just look at the material and say, I'm going to teach this today or I'm going to teach this tomorrow. Read it thoroughly, absorb it, and make sure that it's clear to you so you can disseminate that information. Teachers also need to perceive the quality and practicality of the innovation. So implementing the new paradigm, pre-service teachers. In my classroom, where I now prepare students to use the STEM methodology, I find that pre-service teachers find it challenging to plan the lessons. You know why they find it challenging? Because in a society where it's a prescriptive model that was advocated previously. So they like a recipe. So if the flour is missing, know what to do. The flour is missing and the cake is spoiled. What do I do next? I'm creative. How do I get them to be flexible? I'm at the point where I can say, I don't know, but I'm trying. Right? Access to ICT can be challenging. My students, they want to use it to do other things than to use it to teach. Right? They want to use it to have fun. I say, yes, have fun, but show me how it is going to be integrated in your lesson. That's a challenge. Challenge to refrain from disseminating information. They tell me, yes, I play two roles. I go back to the epistemological understanding. What does it mean to know something? They feel that they are in control of this knowledge. How am I going to control the students? That's always a big question. And I'm asking, why do you think you have all the power? You know? So it's a matter of trying to release yourself from that paradigm. How do I do that? I'm trying again, right? Because our context is test-driven, so that modality is still there. The alignment with working towards test